Welcome to Civility Matters, the podcast that seeks to answer the important question, why you gotta be so rude? Hi there, I'm Dr. John O'Brien, the host of the podcast and author of the book, Rudeness Rehab, Reclaiming Civility in the Workplace and Your Home Space. And I'm very excited for our topic today, which is toxic tiredness, culture cracks, and stress spillover. A conversation with Dr. Mira Brancu. So we'll get to Dr. Brancu in just a moment, but first, to acknowledge, as I travel around the country now and speak to groups about this area of interest to me, incivility and rudeness, I often hear people say that they are concerned about this and the impact that it's having on our culture, and that they believe it's clearly on an increase. But then they ask, John, is that really true? Could it really be that bad? And I could simply say yes, but I try to come up with some statistics to back up the fact that it is true. And that's why in this podcast, I always try to provide some startling statistics for the theme of that month. So here are this month's startling statistics. Two of them from iHire, an online platform. Their 2026 Toxic Workplace Trends Report found that 7 in 10 U.S. workers 70% have worked for an employer that they considered to be toxic, either presently or in the past. In addition, they said the data in this survey pointed to the idea that company leadership is the chief culprit in creating the toxic workplace. 80% of respondents said who had experienced toxicity blamed unethical, unaccountable, and unsupportive management. And almost 3/4 cited poor communication by leaders and managers. Finally, employees in toxic workplace climates are 8 times more likely to burn out than those in healthy ones, probably no surprise. And separately, 44% of US employees report feeling emotionally drained, and 51% feel used up by the end of each workday, indicating that there's a high level of stress and some might say burnout in US workers being driven by toxicity in the workplace. So that's the topic we're going to be unpacking today. And I could not be more thrilled to have our guest, Dr. Mira Brancu. And let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Brancu as I bring her out. She's a former federal healthcare research executive and current founder of the award-winning social impact consultancy TowerScope, as well as a Duke University faculty member. She helps HR and business leaders in expertise-driven high-pressure industries navigate through retention, burnout, uncertainty, and power dynamics in large complex systems. She's also a fellow of the American Psychological Association, which is a great honor, a founding member of the Sage Business Advisory, and Forefront, a leadership coaching legacy of MG 100 Coaches Agency. She's the author of the Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, as well as the companion workbook, a Psychology Today columnist, and host of the award-winning Top 5% podcast and YouTube channel, The Hard Skills. Please join me in giving a warm Civility Matters welcome to Dr. Mira Brancu. And the crowd is going wild. We have a huge crowd in the audience here today.
Thank you so much. I love the clapping. Thank you. That feels so warm and welcoming.
Well, that's what we want to be. We want to be civil and welcoming here on the podcast. So we're so excited to have you here. So
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, before we get into the brass tacks of some of the content, I like to have guests share one fun fact about yourself. So please do. So what would you say is a fun fact about yourself?
Okay, this is actually because I knew you were going to ask me this question. I really went deep into some fun fact that I haven't shared yet before in the past. And that is that when I was young, I had a Barbie doll, and that Barbie doll was at a time when I was also really inspired by Cyndi Lauper. And so I took the Barbie doll and I shaved the side of her head and I cut her hair short and I colored it lots of colors. And somehow, years later, I have ended up looking like her. I don't know if it was like embedded subconsciously for years in my head, but this is how I've landed looking like.
Wow. That's quite interesting. A hairstyle that began many years ago. Many years
Inspired
ago.
by Cyndi Lauper and a Barbie doll.
Inspired by Cyndi Lauper. Indeed. Indeed. That's great. Okay, so we'll go from, I don't know how we segue from hairstyles to expertise, but here we go. Why don't you tell the audience about your expertise in consultancy and coaching, and how you came to specialize?
Yeah. So I actually was a school counselor first for 5 years. And at that time, what I really learned is how the environment and system work together and has a lot to do with your success as a child and as a school counselor and as a leader. Up until that point, the sort of training I had was you focus on the child, they come in, it's you and the child, right? But that's not the case, right? The child
Yeah.
brings with them all of these people around them. Their parents have an idea of how they want to succeed. The teachers have an idea of how they want to succeed. The administration, the district, society, and all of that comes with them. And so I sort of moved with that into my PhD program in clinical psychology. And my expertise began with suicide and PTSD assessment and intervention and neuropsychology, and how within the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is where I started, and as Duke faculty, my main interest was how is it that you can have two people with similar backgrounds and someone over time develops PTSD symptoms or experiences suicidality and someone else doesn't? What is the resiliency recovery model and what are the factors? And so again, it's this interaction of person by environment, right? And so with all of that in mind, over time, I ended up in various leadership roles within the Department of Veterans Affairs, and within specifically research mental health operations. I was the deputy director of one center, interim director of another, and eventually supporting all 17 mental health centers with communication processes and productivity metrics and things like that. And got really, really good at navigating a really complex hierarchical bureaucratic system, one of the largest within the US. Over time, becoming very interested and respecializing informally in organizational development. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but that is what I was doing.
Yes.
And the last 5 years I was at the VA, I transitioned into being an organizational development psychologist, providing leadership coaching and team development facilitation to leaders and teams across the system in hospitals and at central office. And all of that, when you pull it all together, it is really about the human experience and interaction between the individual, team, organization, and society, this 4-level perspective, and what leads to resilience and healthy outcomes in the workplace versus problematic interactions towards unhealthy outcomes. And importantly, bringing my expertise around diagnostic discernment, teasing apart what rests on the individual, what rests within the team, what rests within the organization, and teasing apart like where is it on me to work on myself and where does it rest with other people's control or power or influence.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because I think we were talking before we went live here about the idea of how sometimes the individual may be reactive and therefore their behavior becomes the focus of their negative behavior, becomes the focus of attention when there are these issues at the other systems level. But people have to look beyond the individual to see that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Both. I mean, it's always an interaction, right?
Exactly. Yes. So what's one experience that most changed how you think about your work and people at work?
Yeah, yeah. I might share two
Please.
if we
Yes.
have time. One
Yes,
is
please.
as when I was a school counselor.
Mhm.
Um, at that time, um, again, I was still very early in my career, did not have much political savvy, was not even interested, frankly. I just wanted to do my work, do my thing, right? And I ended up making this political misstep where I ended up sending a very long email, never do that, very long email to my principal about things that I felt were happening that was unethical.
Uh-huh.
And without having access to the decision making process or how she got there or anything like that, and not in a very effective communication method, right? And instead of being provided with appropriate mentorship for how to develop good skills for effectively communicating concerns, I was kind of shooed and dismissed and treated as someone just politically clueless or clueless in general,
Mhm.
and um, really shut out of decision making altogether. And it felt really bad. And what I learned was, at first, what I learned was, oh, I guess I'm just not good at and shouldn't work in any large complex system. Which is funny because later on I did. But
Mhm.
the second was, there's more beyond what's in front of me, and I need to
Mhm.
become aware of that. The second sort of experience was when I did start working with the VA and did have great mentorship and did become privy to sort of how to navigate a system, how to communicate effectively, how to use political savvy for good,
Mhm.
good outcomes and good impact. I ended up being tapped to serve as interim director very early on in my career, like 3 years in, of another research center that was labeled a toxic and hostile work environment.
Ooh,
And
uh-huh.
they wanted me to somehow save the Titanic from sinking, in their words. And
Mhm.
but I was picked because by that time I learned and was able to demonstrate a certain level of unflappability, emotional intelligence, integrity, and desire to do right and not be swayed by politics, but use politics for good, right? And
Mhm.
so all of these experiences really continued to shape how I thought about navigating complexity, using politics for good, recognizing there's more to what is happening in front of you, recognizing the stress response and how
Mhm.
ugly it can look on the outside, and how you have to access it in a different way to help people be their best.
Wow, that's great. Well, that ties quite nicely to my next question. Thank you for that softball setup, which is about your most recent book that you co-authored, "The Millennial's Guide to Office Politics," and also the workbook follow-up. So that's a little infomercial for that for any of you out there.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but maybe, I mean, it seems like it builds on what you're just describing. But what prompted you to write the book? And then when it comes to office politics, both the challenges but also the opportunities you were just describing.
Yeah, yeah. So, what prompted me to write it is, just I felt like um, I had a rare experience to be offered mentorship on something that many people do not get access to.
Yes.
And there's so many people that would benefit. And I thought, well, this is really special. And instead of keeping it all to myself, like it's my little secret, it would be nice to make it accessible to as many people as possible, especially people who don't normally have access to higher level um, leaders who could
Mhm.
mentor them, right? So
Yep.
it was, just making it accessible, basically, and digestible and practical and simple, right?
Mhm.
Because a lot of people think this is like really nebulous stuff. So that's what inspired me. Um, in terms of like the sort of challenges, one one challenge that people face is often that we are so exposed to dirty politics only, that when
Mhm.
we hear the word workplace politics, office politics, we only think about the dirty stuff, the backroom deals, the undermining, the sabotaging, the self-serving stuff. And we say, no, we're not interested in that, because most of us want to function with integrity and aligned with our values, and it feels icky and it feels ugly. And so what we don't recognize in that challenge is that politics are neutral. They are a way to influence change, and they could be used for good or for bad. And
Mhm.
you cannot influence positive change at scale or at higher level impact without politics, because
Mhm.
all work is done through human interaction and trusting relationships. And you can't do that on your own, right? If you opt
Exactly.
out of politics, you're opting out of larger scale impact. And
Yes.
the challenge is always, how do you move through politics with integrity? The other challenge is, as you gain power and privilege and influence, you can inadvertently become more Machiavellian, more manipulative, more self-serving if you aren't constantly checking your values, especially if you have the right skills. Because the right skills to do politics are systems, um, perspective, or intelligence, knowing how to understand and navigate a system, emotional intelligence, and results oriented. You want to see outcomes, results. Those three things you can use for good or for bad.
Mhm.
And so, if you have the right skills, if you're not careful about constantly focusing on how is this benefiting all, instead of how is this just benefiting me,
Mhm.
um, or I have an idea that I think is right and therefore I should influence everyone else to do it my way, then there's a challenge in you ending up doing the very thing you didn't want to do earlier on in your career too.
Right. Right. And I think also, as people get higher up in an organization, they have fewer external inputs of information. And the
Yeah,
people that work for them are maybe less likely to give them honest feedback. And in that way, it's very easy to slip into something like that. So,
that's right. That's right.
okay. So, is there, speaking of gain of influence at work, is there a version of gaining influence at work that's genuinely incompatible with civility? Or can ambition and civility always coexist if someone's intentional about it?
I think they can. I think they
Hmm.
can coexist. I think you can do it well. Um, Going back to, like, first, like the basics, like, do you have the basic skills, systems level influence or intelligence, emotional intelligence, and results oriented? One way to think about this, and we wrote this in our book too, is like a 2 by 2.
Hmm.
And on one side of it, the x-axis, let's say, is self-serving or self-focused versus community focused.
Uh-huh.
And on the y-axis, axis is um, being honest with it or dishonest with it.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
So you can be self-serving and dishonest and only focus on, I want power, I want money, I want the corner office, I will cut knees to get there, I will sabotage, undermine, influence people to believe that this person is bad and I'm good. All of that stuff falls into the quadrant that is like self-serving and dishonest, right?
Hmm.
But if you continue to evaluate, like, how much is this community oriented and how much is this in an honest way, like, I'm trying to get resources for everyone in order for us to all be able to have this higher level result, right?
Hmm.
I'm trying to advocate for our team. I'm trying to create a greater impact where multiple departments have to be involved and we all need to benefit in order to get this higher level result. um, it's going to influence civility or incivility, because the more people feel like you have their back and you're all in it together and you care about everyone benefiting, right? And you're able to use those influencing skills and the emotional intelligence, systems level, results oriented stuff to get that done for everyone, not just for yourself. Then it has like a downstream effect on civility, right?
Absolutely.
It also has a downstream effect on burnout too, on all
Right.
kinds of things.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's also not so much what leaders say, but what they do. And are they doing things that are simply or that appear self-serving only, or are they doing things that are in service to others and they're communicating that? So that's such an important point.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about when things get bad. Okay. So when a team is running on empty, what happens to civility? And now it's the chicken or egg question. Is exhaustion driving the incivility? Is the incivility driving the exhaustion? And does it matter when it comes to how a leader should respond?
Yeah. This is a really great question. I think it matters. I think it
Okay.
does matter for leaders to know. And in most cases, I think that exhaustion comes first before incivility. That's my opinion. I'm curious to see what you think.
Okay.
Incivility can cause exhaustion too. It for sure. We all get exhausted and frustrated being in a space where there's constant incivility as well. But I worry that something else typically will come before incivility. And that can be a wide variety of things. Like I see incivility as a symptom, just like I see a headache as a symptom, right?
Mhm.
Headaches could be because of migraines or a stroke or a concussion, right? And you treat them
Right.
each in very different ways.
Yes.
And that's what really matters for leaders too. Like if the incivility came because of stress or burnout or organizational grief or organizational trauma, massive layoffs, reorgs that are exhausting, all of those things can lead to bad behaviors because it's a stress response, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
or it's a response to hidden grief that can't be demonstrated because nobody wants to talk about it because they want you to get back to work quickly, right?
Uh-huh.
Like all of these things are really important to discern so that you know exactly what to target that makes sense as a target intervention.
Okay. And you just mentioned the term organizational grief. I think if you could just quickly define that for the listeners, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. It's not talked about very much.
Right.
We don't like to talk about grief because it's such a soft feeling, sounding thing. But um, what I've noticed in the last year or two is a whole lot more of hidden or ambiguous grief in the workplace. And um, usually in response to all of the upheaval and reorgs and layoffs that are happening. And what happens to people when this disruption and upheaval constantly happens, but it's not communicated well or it's not planned out well. And people's roles change or their relationship to their organization changes. In ambiguous grief, what happens is like if you have somebody in your life who, for example, ends up having dementia or their personality changes because of a traumatic brain injury or something like that, you don't have resolved grief. You're still living with the person, you haven't lost them, but you have a new relationship that you somehow have to reconcile and you can't
Mhm.
have closure.
Yes.
This is what's happening in organizations. You are having to somehow make sense of a relationship you previously had with your organization that is now lost or different and it's unresolved. And it doesn't look like grief. It looks like disengagement. It
Mhm.
looks like quiet quitting. It looks like incivility. It
Yep.
looks like cynicism. It looks like burnout. It can look like lots of things. Those are observable on the, like, if you think of the iceberg, those are observable behaviors,
Yeah.
but the emotional experience is often grief or fear or anxiety, those kind of things in response to what's at the bottom, which is the root cause, the layoffs, the reorgs, the mismanaged, upheavals.
Well, and my dissertation was on grief, so I have a little expertise in
Ah,
that. But
love
what you're
it.
describing is, I think, this experience of what's called disenfranchised grief, which is a lack of recognition that someone actually could be grieving. So,
Love
like
it.
when
Yes.
someone's former spouse that they are divorced from dies, like, well, people are like, well, you wouldn't be grieving that because you divorced them. Or a therapist whose client dies. Well, therapists don't have feelings. It's
Unrecognized,
recognizing
underappreciated grief.
exactly
Yes, yes.
underappreciated, and that's what goes on, I think, in organizations, which you're
I love
describing.
it. Love
Yeah.
it.
Um, so when incivility spreads through an organization, how much of it is that people choosing to be uncivil versus stress traveling through the system and coming out the wrong way? Kind of related to what we were talking about before.
Yeah, yeah. I rarely, and maybe this is my rose-colored glasses, I rarely think people choose to be uncivil.
Mhm.
10% do, okay? There's always the 10%.
Right.
But most people don't like themselves feeling this way. Like
Yes.
it will come out, and it's often it can be a poor coping mechanism or depleted resources for better coping skills, right? Um, but most of the time, I think that most people don't choose. It is a common response to all kinds of um, situations that happen that are completely out of your control to address,
Yes.
or
Yep.
it
And
feels
I
like
think
it's out of your control.
yes, and I think back to your previous point about, is incivility causing stress or is stress causing incivility? Certainly, I think, in my opinion, they can both kind of lead to the other. But I think I would agree with you. Look at that, we agree. But that, you know, few people get out of bed in the morning and think, how can I really get under the skin of my fellow humans today? Right? There's a
Yeah.
small percentage, and I think a lot of times those are people that are hanging on to resentment,
Hmm.
about something, and that then their resentment, frustration builds up. Resentment is the poison I drink, thinking it will harm you. Sometimes people get
Yeah.
stuck in the resentment, and then that starts to leak out in problematic
That's
ways.
right. That's right. And it, you can also see it as what happens when it gets harder and harder and it requires more and more effort to emotionally regulate in response to something that is extremely frustrating and upsetting, and it keeps coming up and you haven't been able to resolve it. And then, like, exactly what the way that you described it, which is um I don't know how else to respond to this. Like, this
Yeah.
is, I can't let go of this. I'm holding on to it, I'm harboring it, and it just keeps coming up at like an salt in the wound kind of thing.
Yes. Yes. So now it's time for our lightning round. We've got just a few minutes left. So, what would be a quick final piece of advice you have for people if they are in one of these toxic workplaces?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it depends on where you are in the organization, right?
Mhm.
Going back to like the four levels, if you are an individual contributor without any sort of leadership role, that's a lot more challenging. And a lot of that is like getting enough support within and outside the system to be
Mhm.
able to deal with what you're facing, and then learning
Mhm.
how to communicate effectively, manage up, right? If you're in a leadership role and you're a mid-level manager, which is, I think, one of the hardest places to be in an organization right now, because you've got things that, all ends like stretching you thin. It's about both like learning the skills, listening to your people, listening to yourself, coach, therapist, mentors, supervisors, family support, like surrounding yourself with your board of directors. Who are they that can help you?
Yep.
And then at the top of the organization, as executives, learning how to create a really healthy organizational culture and pinpoint where the hot spots are in your organization, where people are having trouble, and knowing how to attend to those hot spots in very targeted ways.
Great. Okay. So, how can viewers connect with you after this podcast?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. First, on LinkedIn, we're doing a LinkedIn Live today,
Yes, we are.
and definitely LinkedIn at Mira Brancu. My website is gotowerscope.com, gotowerscope.com, and then you could also find me on my own podcast, The Hard Skills, as well as my Psychology Today blog, A New Look at Women's Leadership, if you're specifically focused or interested in that.
Wonderful. Well, we did not get to everything that I was hoping we would talk about. So it's been so great to have you on here. I hope you would consider coming back. And I think that the large studio audience that we have here would also agree that they would love to have you back if you'd be willing to join us.
I would love to come back. And then for those of you who are listening to this later, comment on LinkedIn so we could interact and learn more about what resonated for you.
Absolutely. That's great. That's great. So thank you, Dr. Brancu, for your time. And I want to thank all my viewers, whether you are watching live or whether you are watching this afterwards. We'd love to have you back to the next edition of the podcast. So in closing, I'd invite you to recall the old question: how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb must want to change. Aha. So when it comes to the tidal wave of rudeness and incivility in our society, what kind of light bulb are you going to be? So until next time, I'm John O'Brien. And remember, civility matters.